All right, hi everybody. My name is Alan, and it's that time. Let's talk metal. Tonight, we're going to do the second part of the New Wave of British Heavy Metal compilations discussion. Started this one, and if you haven't already seen that video, you can go back and check it out. In that one, I go over some CD comps and spend a lot of time on a particular compilation series out of Japan that is a very good introduction to New Wave of British Heavy Metal, but also a lot of the volumes let you go for a much deeper dive, so that even more experienced hardcore collectors will probably still find stuff in there they like. Tonight, we're going to do the vinyl stuff, look at some old original pressings of New Wave of British Heavy Metal comps. Again, some will be common stuff, and some will be a bit rarer. The video is going to transition here pretty quickly. I originally did the whole discussion as one long video, but it ended up being longer than I wanted to post as a single video, so I'm chopping it up. So you're watching a new introduction right now, and in a second, I'm going to magically change clothes and start talking as though I was in the middle of a conversation, because I was. Hope you all enjoy. Let's see. What the hell? We'll just go ahead and make this a longer video, I think. So that Japanese bootleg series is a great introduction to a wide range of bands. And again, if you're new to the genre, I'd say start with the first 3 volumes. If you're wanting to really, explore the dark, dusty corners, go with those later volumes and work your way through them. Now, again, these are all things that were compiled long after the fact. There were tons of compilations that were put out back in the day. And so now we're going to switch gears and get into the vinyl stack, and we'll look through some of those. Some of these, again, were put out on relatively big labels. They weren't all just, little tiny pressings. NWOBHM Records, got in on the new wave of British heavy metal a little bit and had compilations such as the Brute Force album here. And again, this one features bands you're going to know better, things like Fist, White Spirit, Diamond Head. Quartz makes their way onto a lot of these compilations. Not my favorite band, to be honest. Same can be said of Sledgehammer. Raven has a track on here. Let's see. One of the things to point out, some of the better tracks, Diamond Head's track, It's Electric, is included. That's one of the standouts. You've also got, there's one other really good one. Yes, a band called Crier with a song called Day to Day is one I always liked a lot. There's also always going to be some bands mixed in that, really kind of iffy whether they should be part of the new wave of British heavy metal or not, but, you're trying to throw these compilations together quickly, capitalize on, the hype around the scene. You're going to fill these out with filler sometimes. But yeah, MCA's got, good compilations like Brute Force. You also had a couple of volumes of this series, well-known, Metal for Mothers. This is volume 2. I don't actually have a copy of volume 1. I think the track list on volume 1 is okay, but there's not many songs on it that I'm nuts about. I think volume 2 has a much stronger track list to it. You get Trespasses One of These Days, which is a great song by Trespass. They did a couple of singles and an EP. You've got Dark Stars, Lady of Mars is featured on here. And that, of course, is one of the true anthems of the new wave of British heavy metal. You can't go wrong with that. Chevy is featured on here with a decent track. Trespass also has Stormchild on here, so they got 2 tracks, and deservedly so. So yeah, several really strong ones on Metal from Others Volume 2. All right, if you deal with new wave of British heavy metal very much, the Heavy Metal Records label had a lot of big acts on it, and they did some compilations too. One of the best known is Heavy Metal Heroes Volume 1, which is shown here. This came in a couple of different pressings. This weird looking cover here is the first pressing, where very red and just kind of has their logo stamped all over it. So not all that attractive. The second pressing, when they redid it, had the artwork from the insert. So they had this insert, pinup thing, and this became the cover that was put on the second volume of it. This one's highly regarded. I feel like it's got good bands, but not necessarily their best songs on it. Grim Reaper's featured with The Reaper. Jaguar is featured on here, but it's Storm Child, which is not my favorite Jaguar song. You do have Bitches Sin with Strangers on the Shore, which is one of their top songs. You've got Witchfinder General, but it's the song Rabies, which is not the best in their catalog. Dragster did a great single for Heavy Metal Records, but this song Do It is kind of meh. So yeah, it's kind of like that. The only real obscure one on here to my memory is the band, last one on side A, Metal Mirror. Kind of a weird name. But they did pretty obscure. It's a 7-inch. I don't remember if it has 2 or 3 tracks on it. But yeah, most of these other bands like Split Beaver, Exposure, Buffalo, they would have at least a single, if not an album, released by Heavy Metal. So a lot of these bands did get more vinyl product from Heavy Metal label later on. All right, another label that you've got to be familiar with if you spend much time with new wave of British heavy metal stuff is Neat Records, one of the more prolific records labels of the time. Had better distribution, so a lot of their stuff became better known. They did several kind of iconic compilations. One of the early ones that featured a lot of good stuff is this one. It's called Lead Weight, has this kind of distinctive, very gray cover to it. Lead Weight compilation. What have we got here? Again, you're going to have some of the better known bands from their lineup. You've got Raven, White Spirit. You've got Venom with a good version of Angel Dust. Blitzkrieg does Inferno. Aragorn checks in with another track. Fist seems to be on all these compilation albums. They did some okay songs. Not a personal favorite. Bitches Sin does a great track called Down the Road. Real scorcher there. One of the 146 variations of Warrior shows up here. Sure, Warrior doing a song. If you want to know which one it is, I'll let you figure it out. So yeah, nothing that's, insanely crazy or obscure on it, but it's a very solid compilation. Good tracks by most of the bands featured. So Neat would do some other compilations. One that is probably my favorite, and it's a little hard to explain because it was pressed with several different names, is this one. So this copy is listed under the name All Hell Let Loose, and it was pressed through Neat. Fans of Neat Records will know a lot of their stuff actually sort of was tied to getting pressed in Italy, and this is one of those releases. This, I believe, the way this works, and it's a little convoluted. This compilation, I think, was originally put out on cassette under the name 60 Minutes Plus. And it was a cassette-only release. And then it got a vinyl pressing with a slightly different track list and retitled All Hell Let Loose, which is what I'm holding here. This was one of the first compilation albums I got for new wave of British heavy metal. I think the only one I got before this was one of the BBC compilations. It's like the Friday night one. I'm kind of drawing a blank on it right now because I didn't pull it out. But yeah, this was something I found in the early 90s at a record show in North Carolina when I was just really getting interested in new wave of British heavy metal. So it helped introduce me to a lot of stuff. Cannot tell you how much I played this record all through the mid-90s. And it has a very, very strong track list to it. Let's see what we've got here. Raven, once again, is featured. More obscure band called Steel. They made one single, but it's a good song. Crucifixion, my old favorite, is on here with the fast version of the song The Fox. Again, on their original single, they had recorded The Fox, but it's kind of a slower, raw type song. On this version, they had a new lineup, and they really ramped it up, so it sounds more like a proto-power metal song. Really, really well done. You have Persian Risk is featured on here, although it's 50,000 Stallions, not the best track they ever did. Venom is on here with Bursting Out. You've got a cool song by a band called Saber, Cry to the Wind. Don't know anything else about that band. You have Warrior number 97, 103, 56. I don't know. I don't care. I have my limits, and trying to untangle all the bands named Warrior, that's past my limit. I'm using my safe word. I'm not going there. You also have a cool song by a band called Alien, an Absolute Zero on here. So a lot of cool stuff included on this compilation. Again, not a lot of hideously obscure tracks or anything, but for someone, like myself at the time who was newer to the genre, it was a good way to check a lot of things out. All right, so all of those I've shown off are what I'd say are compilations that are relatively easy to track down and tend to feature a lot of better known bands. They're, again, compilations that are a good introduction for newer people who are curious about new wave of British heavy metal. Next up, we'll kind of transition into compilations that don't have a lot of those better known bands or were on smaller labels, and thus the bands didn't tend to have as much name recognition. One of the best for an introduction into that kind of next tier of obscurity is this one on Logo Records, which is called New Electric Warriors. Logo Records put out some stuff by the band Vardis, who were kind of a new wave of British heavy metal boogie type band. They have some cool stuff. Other than Vardis, I don't think any of the bands on here really went on to have much of a career. The back of this is just noted for having this kind of map theme for the background. And even though a lot of these bands didn't go on to bigger things, they did, several of them did put out singles, and a lot of the tracks on here are really, really good ones. Turbo's Running is good. Buffalo's Battle Torn Heroes, they did a single for Heavy Metal Records. Street Fighter put out a 4-song EP. Let's see. Oxum put out a single later on. It's a fan favorite, has kind of a cult following. It was never one of my favorites off of here. Dawnwatcher contributed their best track with Firing on All 8 to this one. You've got a cool song by a band called Stormtrooper, and there were a couple of Stormtroopers back then too. And you can sort them out if you need to, but I do like the track by this version. Vardis checks in with If I Were King, which is a good track by them. You've got Silverwing. Rabstallion does a cool song called Chain Reaction. A band called Colossus and Jedi Stretch, which I don't know if they ever went on to do other stuff. The obligatory band named Warrior. Whatever, moving right along. A weird song by a band called Kosh, K-O-S-H. So, I don't know, presaging Babylon 5 a decade early. It's kind of a weird song, not the best. And it closes up with a song by a band called Race Against Time called Bedtime. Not the most heavy metal of titles for a song, but regardless, there's a lot of cool stuff on here by bands that didn't make it a lot further. So it's a good way to check out a lot of those sort of next tier new wave of British heavy metal acts. All right, another label that fans of new wave of British heavy metal are going to know is the Ebony record label. They had the sort of characteristic pentagram record label logo. Ebony is known for being one of those kind of B-list labels. Nothing against them at all, but a lot of their bands tend to be a little bit samey sounding. They maybe were a little bit later to the game, so they kind of missed that initial surge of bands. They're best known for having Grim Reaper, was kind of their big breakout band, but they did have other really good acts too. Chateau is one that did several albums for them that's a personal favorite. And Ebony also put out at least 4 or 5 compilation albums in pretty rapid succession, trying to, again, figure out which acts to zero in on, which ones would get the best fan reaction that they could pursue. Most of the Ebony compilations, I'm not a huge fan of, to be honest. I've owned all of them, I think, and the only one I've kept is the Metal Warriors comp. Most of the other ones I just found like, again, the songs were very interchangeable. They didn't feature bands that stuck around very long. And while I've always got a soft spot for those more obscure acts, there just weren't a lot of standouts. I think, off the top of my head, I think one of them is notable for having an early Merciful Fate song included on it, if I'm not getting my wires completely mixed up here tonight. Regardless, Metal Warriors is the one I liked the best. There's a song by Omega on here, which again, formerly known as Apocalypse, was pretty good. You get a few non-British bands mixed in with these, like Merciful Fate was included on the one. France's Sortilege gets a track on here. So yeah, there's nothing that really stands out, but the tracks overall are pretty decent. Again, most of these bands like Breeze, Random Black, Flight, High Level. Didn't necessarily go on to produce a whole lot of material. But if you're really wanting to explore all the nooks and crannies for the more obscure bands, the Ebony compilations are usually not that hard to track down and not that expensive, and do feature a wide range of stuff. Just don't expect to find a ton of hidden gems, but hey, your taste may be a little different than mine, and you may find all kinds of cool stuff that you like on them. One more on this kind of tier of obscurities that I thought I'd point out is the Metal Warrior compilation. So we had Metal Warriors, now we have Metal Warrior, because that's not confusing at all. Regardless, this one is actually more of sort of like a mini LP. I think it's too long to be an EP. It's not long enough to be an album. So let's go with mini LP. It's always that fuzzy in between. But that's a rant for another time. Anyway, this one came out around 86, if I remember right. And so you're getting, again, kind of into that post-new wave of British heavy metal phase. But it's notable, again, for featuring one or two non-British bands. It has a track on here by Not Fragile, who I've talked about in some of my German heavy metal videos before. That's pretty good. So yeah, you also have a track by a band called Deuce, and there are 2 or 3 versions of bands named Deuces, so you have to be careful with that one as well. First Offense is on here. Easy Meat is another one. That's pretty cool. They actually did get 2 albums put out there in the mid or late 80s. So yeah, another one that's featuring those smaller bands. That's not bad. I like the track selection overall. Okay, last tier then to go to, kind of the 9th level of heavy metal collector hell for new wave of British heavy metal fans, is getting into the compilations that themselves are very hard to find and typically feature bands that, yeah, didn't go very far or have a more eclectic range of material featured on them. So I'll wrap up tonight by showing a few examples of those. First one we have here is a compilation known as The Bridge Album. And this is a good example of one that really falls more under the category of local sampler rather than full-blown compilation. You know, this is kind of the British equivalent of the radio station compilations that were a big deal in the United States in the 1980s, where, you know, some local radio station would just put out an album of the local, you know, best of the bands, or they'd have one of those battle of the bands competitions, and every band would get a track thrown on the compilation just to help promote the radio station and local music. It's kind of what some of these more obscure new wave of British heavy metal compilations are like. So yeah, the Bridge Album features various things. As you can probably start to sense from the names of some of these bands, you have things like Stella Robella, and we have Mint. These are not all metal bands. With these kind of compilations, you start straying into bands that are playing anything from pop to synth music to a lot of like reggae kind of stuff. You have to remember around this time, bands like the Police were getting big, and other bands were kind of, you know, picking up on, you know, their sort of, you know, reggae-ish undertones to their music. So a lot of times you only get a few heavy metal bands included on these. On this particular one, the bands that will stand out for metal fans, Heretic is not bad with their track. North Star, I'm pretty sure they did at least one single later on. It's an okay song. Cherry Armadillo. No, that's not a heavy metal band. Stay away from that one. But the other big metal track is this one. The gem on here that you do want is the track by Tempest Ride. I mentioned it earlier in the video. It was on one of those Japanese unofficial comps. And again, it is a magnificent song. It is good enough that I spent a long time tracking this bloody album down so I could own the original album, because it is one of the true classics of the entire genre. All right, another example of one of these much smaller compilations that almost falls under this local sampler is this series known as Southern Comfort. This is volume 1. I believe they did at least 3 and maybe 4 volumes. I know for a long time collectors were having a hard time finding one of the middle volumes that everybody had. Like, people had found volume 1, 2, and 4, and they were missing 3 from a lot of discographies or something. Anyway, again, you get into some bands here that are not going to be heavy metal acts at all. This one, though, is notable for having 5 stone cold killer new wave of British heavy metal songs on it. And some of these I've featured on previous videos in the little mini series on Let's Hear Metal, where I made up some of the best heavy metal singles that never got made. And a couple of them came off this compilation. You have a band named Deuce, which, again, be careful when you're looking at things by bands named Deuce. There's several of them. But they've got a couple of incredible songs on here with Sail Me Away, and the other one is Mystery Lady. And then you also have a band on here called Straight Six. Now, Deuce ended up being featured on a lot of these volumes, but their tracks on the later volumes aren't quite as strong. Straight Six, to my knowledge, never did anything but these few songs, and they're 3 of the best new wave of British heavy metal songs. I really do wish that band could have gotten a break and recorded an EP, an album, a demo, a jingle for a commercial. I don't know, but they needed to do something else, because those songs are just absolutely amazing and deserved to be on something a little more high profile than this little sort of local sampler level kind of compilation. The other volumes of Southern Comfort aren't noted for having any real standout heavy metal tracks to them. So volume 1 is definitely the one to pick up. All right. Okay, I guess I should have mentioned this one earlier. This does fall a little more under the category of, it was released by Guardian Records, which was known for putting out a lot of heavy metal stuff in the new wave of British heavy metal, but their releases also were always a little harder to get. They became collectible very quickly. They were pretty scarce and hard to find, several of them even by the 1990s. And the one I'm talking about is the Rock Snacks compilation. They made 2 compilations on Guardian. The other one is called Rockscalibur, which is also good. I just don't own an original copy of it. But Rock Snacks is one that features 3 bands, and each one got to do multiple tracks. And once again, band names become an issue here, because you first off have Saracen, but it's not the Saracen who did the Heroes, Saints, and Fools album. Excellent album, by the way. And then you've got Samurai, but it's not the Samurai who released the 2 albums later on, Sacred Blade and Weapons Master. Excellent albums, by the way. And then you have Hollow Ground, who I mentioned earlier. And Hollow Ground, all 3 of these are pretty good bands with decent songs, but Hollow Ground is the classic on here. They released an EP, 7-inch, on the Guardian label that's always been one of the really high-profile rarities in new wave of British heavy metal circles. It was always a hard one to get. I have a heartbreaking story. I missed getting that single twice by a handful of just hours on each occasion. But yeah, they have some really good tracks. So this one's a nice compilation. Rockscalibur is also a good one. It features some unreleased early Satan material from around the same recording session where they did their 7-inch Heads Will Roll and Kiss of Death. Okay, I'll quickly tell the story on Hollow Ground. Why not? We're already at the 45-minute marks, so what the hell. Yeah, the Hollow Ground EP was one of those I heard early on, really wanted. A few years later, one of the old big-time collectors named Paul Roach was selling off his collection. He had it listed for sale. I got a copy of his sale list in the mail, called him up. He was like, yeah, still got it. He's like, excellent, I will take it. Couldn't have been happier. For about 4 hours. At which time, Paul called me back. And in an extremely apologetic voice, had to explain that he had forgotten. Somebody had called earlier that day and already requested the Hollow Ground single. So yeah, that was a thing. And what made it even worse was it was the second time I had missed out on the single. A couple of years before that, I'd gotten a mail order list from another old vinyl dealer named John Allenson, and he had a copy of it listed. And I was like, oh, I want to look at this so bad. The problem was I'd gotten the mail order catalog from him in the mail that morning, but I didn't have time to look at it because I was jumping in the car that day with my then girlfriend to go on spring break. And so it wasn't until we were driving along that I looked through it and saw, oh my God, he's got a copy of the Hollow Ground single for sale. But I'm in the middle of the interstate, in the middle of the 90s. Cell phone's not exactly a thing yet. So I couldn't call him until that evening to ask if he still had it. He didn't still have it. He had sold it earlier that afternoon. So yeah, yay technology. Now I'd be able to call him right away and I could have gotten it. I did eventually get the Hollow Ground EP many, many, many years later, after also losing out on an eBay auction at like the last second by $5. So yeah, that one led me a merry chase. Anyway, let's get back on topic here. I've got just one or two more to wrap up with. You also have, going back to the sort of more obscure local sampler level of stuff, Parkside Steelworks is another one that features some very non-metal things. Let's check out, yeah, Circa, Gypsies, some of these bands, yeah, you can kind of get the sense we're not talking strictly metal here. The big one, though, is, and the reason you get this is right there, Mindy's Prey. 2 unreleased tracks, Red Alert and Cry for the World. Great songs, both of them by one of the real classy sounding new wave of British heavy metal acts. So yeah, there are a lot of compilations like these where they were put out, by maybe just a particular pressing plant or a particular label or radio station or whatever, put stuff out, and that was it. It was just whatever local bands happened to sign on at the time. A couple of other examples. The It's Unheard Of compilation kind of falls in this bin, along with another one. This is a boot CD that kind of crams 2 of them on the same thing. And I've got a bunch of stickers inside this for some reason. Let's get those out of the way. The Kent Rocks compilation also kind of falls in this vein. Both of these are okay. They both contain some really good tracks, but they also are kind of hit or miss in my opinion. One thing to note too, this boot CD is not the best way to hear these 2 albums because they did cull some of the songs off. They couldn't fit both albums on one CD. So it actually only has about half of the Kent Rocks compilation on this particular one. So you can hear a lot of the material on here, but not the full version of the albums. Oh, last one on the stack that I forgot to mention. When I showed the All Hell Let Loose compilation earlier, I mentioned that it originally started life as a cassette copy called 60 Minutes Plus. It's also been reissued a few times over the years on different labels, and each time it has kind of a slightly altered track list. Just an example, here's a CD compilation called Metal Minded. Couldn't look more generic, but it is actually about 90% of the 60 Minutes Plus compilation. You have the same lineup with Raven, Steel, Crucifixion, Persian Risk, etc., but you have a few other good tracks mixed in here. There's an unreleased track by a band called Goldsmith, who did a very unremarkable single later on. You have a different Jaguar track, I think. You have Demon with one of their later poppier songs called Wonderland included. Really good track by a band called Stormbringer called Searching is in here. Limelight has one of their later more poppy songs as well. So yeah, you can find different versions of that compilation with different names, and there'll always be a few songs swapped in and out. Don't know how that keeps happening. Just somehow it keeps getting relicensed, but never with the same track list. Okay, definitely have talked long enough about new wave of British heavy metal compilations tonight. So let's bring this to a close, and then let's talk metal in the comments down below. What are some of your favorites that I failed to mention? There are a lot of them that I have not shown off. Again, the video is long enough as it is. What are some great ones that didn't make an appearance tonight? What are some of your favorite tracks that were compilation-only appearances, or bands that only had that one sort of little bit of exposure and then disappeared before they got to do their own single or their own album? Leave a comment down below. Let me know what I overlooked, what I overrated, or what I underrated. Okay, until next time, everybody take care and keep banging your head.